So here we go with this, okay? So now we're gonna look specifically at fertilization and blend it into development, because here's technically when sperm cell meets egg cell and you have zygote, reproduction's over. What happens from that point on is called development, right? That little creature that's got its own unique set of genes now, right? But it's only one cell. All the changes that happen until, the day that it dies, which might be 100 years later if it's a human, right? Or more even, those are all called development. So we're going to, hit the bridge here of where reproduction ends at fertilization and then go into that. Here, they just make this one little note, and this may be, excuse me, when they ask you, like, what's the difference between reptiles and amphibians and mammals, this may be one thing that they point to, but like it says here, fertilization in animals can be internal or external. If you are going to make eggs, and you are going to lay them out there for the entire world to possibly eat as fish food, or people food, right? If you're a fish, all those eggs called caviar, right, that you put just out in the water, evolutionary wise, right, what strategy has evolved is you make a whole bunch of them, right? And then you're also gonna, I don't know if you can see this milky kind of fluid here, you're also gonna just go throw the sperm cells out there. Those things are made of good organic molecules, and so something's gonna eat those sooner or later. But if you put enough of them out there, the chances that some of them make it to reproductive age themselves, increases dramatically. So this is a characteristic of external fertilization, is the production of a whole lot of gametes. Um, so I'm going to show this in class, but here now we have some directives and some terms. There's that acrosome, that vesicle in the sperm cell that is part of a reaction called an acrosome reaction, right? That the plasma membrane of the egg and the sperm cell fuse, and that fusion and the acrosome reaction itself results in a reaction called a cortical reaction. All of these are in there. So here we go with a little bit of those. God, funnies are just all over the place here. So this we just looked at. I'm going to get a diagram up here in a second. What the acrosomal reaction is when this sperm cell with the acrosome right in its tip bumps into an egg cell. Then we're going to get exocytosis. Okay, so we throw that in there too. This is that active transport kind of vesicle related called exocytosis. So here's the diagram that makes this so much like so many other things, although this diagram doesn't show it. But there are molecules on the surface of this sperm cell which are going to match molecules on this layer of the egg cell, this layer called the zona pellucida. That name didn't make the syllabus. That match like enzymes and substrates, like antibodies and antigens. And what this has evolved is to prevent this very precious egg cell, because it could be another possible baby, from being fertilized by a sperm cell of an animal that wouldn't produce and would therefore waste, a baby would waste this egg cell. So this is why you can take egg cells out of an elephant if you want, and you can take sperm cells from a crocodile, and you can put them in vitro in a petri dish, but they will not fertilize because they don't match up proteins on the surface of both cells. So that I just threw that in there evolutionary wise, because here you see the acrosome reaction. When that contact is made, and that would be in the video that I showed you in class, that I skipped on here. When that contact is made, one thing it triggers is this vesicle to release all its contents. What these enzymes then digest is this thick, almost kind of a shell. If you can think of it as an eggshell if you want, but it's not like a chicken eggshell. But it's a very thick, this zona pellucida, and it starts to eat it away because the plasma membrane of the egg cell is underneath it. So for sperm cell membrane to meet egg cell membrane and merge, like it says in the syllabus, you got to eat away at this. Now what this also does is it also triggers some granules that are in here. What are granules? They're also little vesicles. They also have some enzymes in them, and you can see in a little time lapse here that they are going to fuse with the plasma membrane and let these things out. This is the cortical reaction. So that's not on this page, but it was on the last page, and it'll come up again. This is the cortical reaction. And while this picture's up here, I'll just show you what it does. So when the chemicals inside here start to mix with chemicals in the zona pellucida, some chemistry happens. And that makes this zona pellucida quite hard, physically hard, and impenetrable to more sperm cells. Because what they're gonna say in a purple print coming up soon is that this cortical reaction prevents polyspermy. Because another thing that would be bad and therefore a waste of all these cells and all the resources used to make those cells was that if this egg cell with its single haploid nucleus got fertilized by 20 sperm cells, and there's always plenty of sperm cells to go around, right? Then you would get a zygote that's got too many chromosomes in it and it wouldn't work. So this cortical reaction has evolved to prevent polyspermy. So who's the winner? Very simply, this is a race. If you can think of this diagram as having hundreds and hundreds of sperm cells reaching this egg cell, all at slightly different times, the one that makes it actually to the plasma membrane first and therefore triggers this cortical reaction is the one that's going to allow its unique haploid set of chromosomes to actually become part of a little diploid zygote. Okay, so this is kind of neat, and we'll see a little bit in a video I'm going to show in class. But it's a lot of this didn't make the IB syllabus, and I'm disappointed because this development is really neat. How we've learned that it works, and we're still learning that it works. Here's the mechanisms that prevent polyspermy. Now I gotta go to the next one. This is a good story though on there. I'll let you read it there for a second. But one of those mechanisms is again the cortical reaction, and that was in a separate little purple blurb. But there's another one that I'm going to see if they work in, and if not, I'll work it in. Yeah. So the cortical reaction made it here, but what also happens is this: when sperm cell meets egg cell, we get an opening of channels. This is now facilitated diffusion. And off the top of my head, I forget whether they're sodium, potassium, calcium, or what they are, but we get, I think it might be sodium's in. Anyway, we get a flip-flop of the charges, positive and negative on either side, and that flip-flop happens very fast, and it also prevents polyspermy as well as that cortical reaction that has to do with that thick zona pellucida that's out here. So two blocks. One is very fast, and it's a flip-flop of charges, and the other is the cortical reaction that has to do with those little vesicles that make the cortical reaction happen. Okay, so now again, they don't do much unfortunately, of development, but they do switch to the end of development, which is birth here, not the end of development, but of the fetus, which is birth, and so we'll get to that a little bit. But I'll just point out that when a zygote starts to do mitosis now, and some of the cells start to become different from other cells, at one point in time, about a week, we call you this, blastocyst. You're a hollow ball of cells. You look kind of like this in diagram, right? And all of these cells are yours, but only these cells are actually going to end up becoming you, and the rest of them are kind of outside, and they do other things. But this is what they call you when you implant in the inner lining wall, endometrium, and that implantation is a very key event in your life. Um, and it's essential for pregnancy to continue, because this is the little guy that's going to start to secrete a chemical that's going to be on the next page, I think, that says, hey, I'm here. And who it's talking to, right, is back here to this corpus luteum. And it's going to say, hey, I'd appreciate it if you could keep making progesterone and estrogen, because those are the two chemicals that are keeping this uterine wall, specifically the endometrium, nice and thick and vascularized with mommy's blood cells, so that someday I can start to share mommy's lunch, right? So I'll just put it right here, right now. That messenger hormone is called human chorionic gonadotropin. The chorion is this layer of cells that is going to make that chemical. That's chorionic. Gonadotropin. Tropins are hormones that signal the release of other hormones, in this case from that female gonad that we call an ovary, so gonadotropin, and H for human. This is the pregnancy test drug. This is the one that is only produced if there's a little baby to be, and therefore in a blood sample or a urine sample, because it can get past. Now we'll connect that, right. It can get past the glomerulus into the nephron and into the collecting duct, into the urine. And if this connects with another kind of chemical that fits it, it changes color, and that's how pregnancy tests work. They look at and for this hormone. There we go. I thought this was in the syllabus. So I just said that this hormone, which is coming from the little, which we'll call an embryo now. An embryo is kind of a general word. So the blastocyst is specifically the form of the embryo that secretes this, but they don't even ask you what secretes it. They just want you to know that stimulates the ovary, specifically the corpus luteum, to keep secreting progesterone. It keeps the corpus luteum working for a while. It blocks the signals for apoptosis, so those cells don't kill themselves, and it maintains that endometrium, which they really should have put in this to say what it does. Okay, so now a little more time goes by, just a little more time, right? And so for the first 2 to 4 weeks, we got a lot of diffusion and active transport between just the endometrium and that embryo that's all embedded in its wall, just literally surrounded by it. But all this while, the signals have started, often cells contacting other cells kind of signal mechanisms, signal transduction pathways, gene regulation, to start making this very unique organ that is part mom and part baby, that organ called the placenta. So here we have placenta, right? It's facilitating the exchange of materials between the mother and fetus. It doesn't sound like they're going to ask you real specifics about it, so I'll show just a little bit here. This has to do with circulatory system stuff also. And then once it has formed, it takes over the secretion of these things to maintain that endometrium, right? Because you still don't want that wall of the uterus to shed itself, because now not only has little baby arrived, but little baby is getting bigger and bigger. So here's the placenta, right? Here's where it would be. This uterus is now getting bigger and bigger, right? The placenta is connecting little growing up baby, which we would call a fetus by the time it looks like this for sure, and mom, right? So if we look at just part of that wall right here blown up, maternal portion of placenta means all these cells have mom's 2 sets of chromosomes. The fetal portion means all these cells have baby's sets of chromosomes. All right, you're going to do I think you're going to do a graph about why doesn't mom reject this foreign tissue? Because it is foreign tissue. We'll get to that in a minute, but here's a neat architecture. This is a somewhat unique. There's a couple other places where the normally closed circulatory system of humans becomes a little bit open, like in insects. Because here you have blood vessels, so here's an artery where blood's coming here, that just end. And now the blood just spills out into this little chamber, which one wall of which is mom's tissues and the other wall of which is fetal tissues. This little chamber also includes big capillary beds from the fetal blood system that's funneling in there through the umbilical cord, right? So mom's blood is spilling out all over the capillaries of baby's blood. Mom's blood vessels are not directly connected to baby's, and that's a good thing because you want some selective transfer going on here. So we have lots of passive transport of oxygen and stuff like that, and carbon dioxide, and we also have the active transport of lots of things. We've got amino acids and glucoses and all those kind of nutrients coming here and getting from mom's spilled out blood into these capillaries and then toward baby, right? And then there are places where squishing around, this blood simply gets pushed back into mom's circulatory system. And so for this little place here, for this point in time, mom's circulatory system is a little bit open, kind of like an insect's. This really takes a minute. Okay, time's up. No more. Okay, so now we have something that is in the syllabus, and we talked about this, even though we didn't get to reproduction, we did mention this as a classic example of positive feedback, and they want you to know that 2 chemicals are involved here, and what they are mediating, what they're making happen, is birth, specifically the contractions of the muscles in the uterine wall mostly, and then in the vaginal wall, that are going to push little baby out because it's ready to go. Okay, so if we look at this diagram, we have estrogen that's coming from the ovaries, and the ovaries are still making estrogen here, right? And this is signal molecules, gene regulation. They're going to induce cells in the uterine wall to make these proteins that are receptors for this chemical. Okay, so now they can pay attention to this chemical. And this chemical is, and these receptors are found only in very few places. And in this case, right now, they're going to be found in the uterus. So from the fetus and from mom, specifically from posterior pituitary, I don't think they would ask you that about where that comes from, but this chemical starts to get released. So when this chemical bumps into these uterine cells that now have receptors for this chemical, we again have signal molecule meets receptor, signal transduction pathway. These cells start doing something different, and what they start doing different is contracting. Uterine muscles contract. They also stimulate the placenta to make these, but that didn't make this, so don't worry about that part of the story. If you throw it in there, fine, but it just gives you another thing to get mixed up. You know what I mean? So what these stimulate is uterine contractions. And that again stimulates the placenta to make this, which stimulates more contractions. This is positive feedback. And then those contractions themselves stimulate the making of more oxytocin and more prostaglandins, but they just want you to fit the oxytocin into this positive feedback loop until finally more and more and more means what? You're all kind of familiar with this. The contractions start coming closer together in time, right? You're paying attention to that time, and the contractions start to become harder. More is always the positive feedback loop. Okay. So then another thing that's happening, which didn't make the thing here, is this uh, this muscular part of the tube, right? The tube that is uterus and then vagina, that muscular gate between the two called the cervix. For baby to come out, that's going to have to enlarge. This is the same kind of muscle that's at those junctions of your digestive tract, the kind that's called a sphincter. This is the cervical sphincter, right? So those muscle cells need to relax. And so they get a signal to start relaxing, and this dilation of the cervix is also being measured by the doctor, right? And when it gets to a certain point, they know that, okay, baby's coming. Let's send you in this room and let's get ready to go. And so this is all the rest of that part, which they didn't, they didn't put any of this in the syllabus, but umbilical cord still connected to placenta, right? But now baby's out. And now for the first time, baby's lungs can suck in some air, right? And for the first time, baby can be fed directly through their digestive system and all that. So this is when the doctor cuts the cord and off to college you go. Ha, there you go. So there is a bit of contraception stuff in here. Um, I almost should go back to that graph, but if you remember the graph, high levels of progesterone and estrogen after ovulation, so like in the second half of the menstrual cycle, they are messages that say, uh, let's keep the endometrium cells making, right? And then remember, it's progesterone and estrogen that then come from the corpus luteum and then from the embryo, the placenta and the embryo itself that keep these high. This is what also says, hey, don't do that shedding of the endometrium, right? Menstrual cycle, which means don't start another cycle and release another egg. We don't want ovulation to happen. High levels of estrogen and progesterone are what negative feedback style keep another cycle and therefore another ovulation from happening. So once we understood this chemistry biology, we started to think, oh, if we just artificially raise the levels of those two hormones, then we can artificially suppress ovulation from happening. No ovulation, no fertilization, no conception. So this was and is the chemicals that are in the modern birth control pill. Throughout history, there's been lots of birth control things thought up, and I might tell a couple stories about that. But here we go with they didn't ask you to know what's in birth control pills and how they worked, even though they want you to know in the natural story of things that these hormones are the ones that are going to kind of block further menstrual cycles and therefore further further eggs from being released and conception happening. But they throw this in here in the nature of science things, which I've seen them ask questions about before. So here is now an ecological story, right? This is not just progesterone and estrogen in birth control pills that might get flushed down the toilet or might just come out in in the urine of a female and therefore get in the water system and start bumping into all other kinds of things. So these are part of the hormone, only part of the hormones that have got their way into our food system, which uh, is one of those nature of science things. I don't know what they'd ask you about this, but this is a specific thing that this risks male fertility, because if this female hormones bumps into male cells, they basically say, don't do that sperm production thing because you're not a guy. And so somebody thought this was, and it is, it's obviously it's impactful environmentally and societally and everything like else, but so they might ask you that. So there, that's that one. This is up to date. I thought that was just kind of cute. So there we go. There's reproduction system.